February 19th, 1985. Central Intelligence Agency Headquarters, Langley, Virginia. 11:17 Ante-Meridium. Aldrich Hazen Ames sits alone in the corner of the crowded cafeteria, staring at his tuna sandwich. His hands are steady, too steady for a man about to commit treason. Around him, analysts discuss weekend plans. Secretaries laugh about office gossip. Junior officers complain about their supervisors. Nobody notices the 43-year-old counterintelligence officer with thinning hair and a cheap suit. Nobody ever notices Aldrich Ames. That invisibility is about to become the deadliest weapon in Soviet intelligence history. In his jacket pocket, folded twice, sits a piece of paper, 5 inches by 7 inches, typed. No fingerprints except his own. 7 names. 7 Soviet military and intelligence officers who work secretly for the United States. 7 men Moscow believes are loyal communist patriots. By sunset today, all 7 will be marked for death. Ames knows this. He planned it. The paper represents 18 months of research. He copied files after hours, memorized operation codes, cross-referenced agent reports. He identified the crown jewels of American intelligence in the Soviet Union, the sources who provided the most valuable secrets, the assets who cost Moscow the most damage. Then he wrote down their names, not to protect them, to sell them. Ames finishes his sandwich at 11:34. He wipes his mouth with a paper napkin, drops it on the tray, stands, walks toward the exit with the shuffling gait of a man who drinks too much and sleeps too little. Security guards at the door nod. They see him every day. Unremarkable, forgettable. He pushes through the glass doors into the February cold. The parking lot stretches gray and empty under overcast sky. His brown Jaguar sits in space, 212. He bought it last month. $40,000, 3 times his annual salary. Nobody at the agency questioned how a GS-14 with a drinking problem and a messy divorce could afford a luxury car. They assumed family money. They assumed wrong. Ames drives out of the CIA compound at 11:49. The guards wave him through. Standard Monday exit. He turns left onto Dolly Madison Boulevard, right on Chain Bridge Road, then Georgetown Pike toward downtown Washington. The route takes him past suburban shopping centers and bare winter trees. He checks his mirrors constantly, looking for surveillance. The FBI runs periodic spot checks on CIA employees, random tails to verify nobody makes unauthorized contacts. Ames sees nothing suspicious, no repeated vehicles, no obvious watchers. He is clean. At 12:11 post-meridium, Ames turns onto Wisconsin Avenue. The Soviet embassy compound rises ahead on the right. Brick walls, iron gates, security cameras on every corner, armed guards visible on the roof. The entire block radiates hostility. Every American intelligence agency watches this building 24 hours daily. Cameras photograph everyone who enters. License plates get recorded. Faces get matched to databases. Any CIA employee spotted within 3 blocks triggers automatic counterintelligence investigation, career-ending investigation. Ames knows this. He drives past without slowing. 3 blocks beyond the embassy, he parks on a side street, kills the engine, sits. His heart rate stays normal, 68 beats per minute. Blood pressure 120/80. No sweating, no tremor. Psychiatrists will later marvel at this. They will call it pathological calm, the mark of severe personality disorder. But Ames is not thinking about psychology. He is thinking about timing. The KGB station chief, Viktor Cherkashin, expects him at 12:15. Ames confirmed the appointment through a dead drop 2 days ago. A chalk mark on a mailbox in Alexandria. Old school tradecraft. Cherkashin is old school KGB. Trained in the paranoid Stalinist tradition, where one mistake means a bullet, in Lubyanka basement. Ames trusts him completely, not because Cherkashin is trustworthy, because Cherkashin is predictable. He will take the information. He will pay. He will protect his source. Standard procedure. Ames exits his car at 12:13. He walks back toward the embassy. The cold bites through his suit jacket, but he does not hurry. Hurrying attracts attention. He maintains the same shuffling pace. Hands in pockets, eyes down. Just another bureaucrat on a lunch errand. At 12:14, he reaches the embassy gate. The guard, a young man with Slavic features and a bulky coat hiding his sidearm, steps forward. Ames speaks clearly in English. He requests meeting with the cultural affairs officer. Standard diplomatic cover. Everyone knows cultural affairs means intelligence. The guard nods, makes a phone call from the gatehouse, speaks rapid Russian, hangs up, waits. 4 minutes pass. Long enough for verification, long enough for Moscow Center approval via encrypted cable, long enough for Cherkashin to prepare the meeting room, counter-surveillance equipment, recording devices, witness. The KGB documents everything. Protection against provocations, protection against double agents, protection against their own officers who might be tempted to defect with evidence of American treachery. At 12:18, the gate opens. The guard gestures Ames inside. No words, no greeting. Pure operational security. Ames enters Soviet territory. Technically, he stands on Russian soil now. The embassy compound enjoys diplomatic immunity. American law enforcement cannot touch him here. He could stay forever, request asylum, live out his life in Moscow as a celebrated defector. But Ames has different plans, bigger plans. He wants the money and the life. He wants to betray America while still enjoying American comfort. He wants everything. A second officer meets him in the lobby. Older, gray suit, no expression. He leads Ames down a corridor, past offices with Cyrillic nameplates, past portraits of Lenin and Gorbachev, past the trappings of communist authority. They reach a small conference room, soundproofed, no windows, a table, 3 chairs. Viktor Cherkashin sits waiting, 51 years old, career intelligence officer, veteran of operations across Eastern Europe and South America, master of agent recruitment, patient, methodical, deadly. He stands when Ames enters, shakes hands, gestures to a chair. The door closes. They are alone. Ames reaches into his pocket, removes the folded paper, places it on the table, says nothing. Cherkashin picks up the paper, unfolds it, reads. His face shows nothing. Years of training, years of survival in Soviet intelligence bureaucracy, but his pupils dilate slightly. Pulse visible in his neck increases. Breathing deepens. Involuntary physiological responses. The names on this paper represent intelligence gold. Cherkashin recognizes at least 4 immediately. Major General Dmitry Polyakov, Colonel Oleg Gordievsky, Adolf Tolkachev. Assets who have damaged Soviet security for years. Sources Moscow has hunted desperately. Now a CIA officer walks in and hands over their identities. No negotiation, no demands, just treason, pure and simple. Cherkashin asks one question. Why? Standard procedure. Moscow will demand explanation. They will suspect provocation. They will question motive. Is this officer legitimate, or is he an FBI plant trying to feed disinformation? Ames answers carefully. He explains his financial problems, divorce costs, debt. He needs money. The Soviets have money. Simple transaction, business arrangement. Nothing ideological, nothing political, just capitalism applied to espionage. Cherkashin nods. The answer satisfies. Greed makes sense. Greed is understandable. Greed is controllable. If Ames wants money, they can pay money. If he wants more money, they can provide more intelligence requirements. A mercenary is easier to manage than a believer. Believers get unpredictable. Believers develop conscience. Mercenaries just want payment. The meeting lasts 18 minutes. Cherkashin asks about operational security. How did Ames access these files? Who else knows? What counterintelligence measures exist? Ames explains his position. Senior counterintelligence officer, direct access to Soviet operations files, authorized to review ongoing cases. Nobody monitors his file requests. Nobody questions his research. He operates with complete freedom. Cherkashin absorbs this, calculates risk, assesses potential. This source offers more than just 7 names. This source offers sustained access to the entire American intelligence apparatus targeting the Soviet Union. Every operation, every agent, every secret. The recruitment of the century. At 12:36 post-meridium, Ames stands. No payment changes hands. Not yet. First, Moscow must verify. They will check the names, investigate the suspects, confirm the information is genuine. If the arrests follow, if the intelligence proves accurate, then payment, then long-term arrangement, then systematic exploitation of the most valuable mole in Soviet intelligence history. Ames understands. He expected this. He walks back to the lobby. The gray-suited officer leads him to the gate. No farewell, no acknowledgement. Ames steps back onto Wisconsin Avenue, back onto American soil, back into his life as a CIA counterintelligence officer. Nobody saw him enter. Nobody saw him exit. The surveillance cameras captured his face, but the film will be reviewed by CIA officers who assume anyone entering the Soviet embassy is either a diplomat or a provocateur. They will not recognize one of their own. Ames returns to his car, drives back to Langley, arrives at 108. He parks in his assigned space, walks to his office, sits at his desk, begins reviewing files for a memo due tomorrow. Around him, the CIA continues its daily operations. Analysts draft reports, officers plan operations, technicians maintain communications equipment. The machinery of American intelligence grinds forward. None of them know that the machine just broke. None of them understand that the enemy now sees every move they make. None of them suspect that the quiet drunk in the corner office just killed 10 men and crippled United States intelligence operations for a generation. The treason is complete. The damage is irreversible. And Aldrich Ames is hungry. He missed lunch. Moscow. Lefortovo Prison. March the 7th, 1985. 327 Anti-Meridium. The sound comes first. Metal on metal. A bolt slamming back. Then the door explodes inward so violently that dust drifts from the ceiling. The shock of cold air hits Major General Dmitry Polyakov in the face before his eyes even open. He jerks up from the narrow cot, heart punching his ribs. For a second, he does not remember where he is. Then the smell reminds him. Disinfectant. Old sweat. Urine baked into concrete. Lefortovo. 2 guards step inside. Young. Faces blank. Eyes dead. Their rubber boots squeak on the floor. One of them has a small, dark stain on his cuff. Could be old coffee. Could be old blood. Neither carries handcuffs. Neither carries a rifle. That tells Polyakov more than any words. When they intend to keep a man alive, they bring shackles and paperwork. When they intend to kill him, they just come. He swings his legs off the cot. The concrete bites cold through his bare feet. His knees betray his age. 64 years carved into bone and cartilage. One guard throws his uniform jacket at him. The fabric smells of damp wool and cigarette smoke. His fingers shake as he buttons it. Not because of the cold, because this is it. 42 years serving the Soviet state, 18 years serving its enemy, all of it narrowing now to a corridor, a door, a wall. They march him out. The hallway is a tunnel of yellowed light and peeling paint. Somewhere far down the line, a man screams hoarsely, voice cracked from overuse. The scream cuts off mid-note as if severed with a knife. Polyakov feels his stomach twist, not from fear of pain. Pain he understands, pain he has ordered others to endure. What he cannot bear is the thought of disappearing, of having his name scrubbed from files, his photo burned, his existence denied. The Soviet system kills twice, first the body, then the memory. They do not take him to the basement, not yet. They turn into an interrogation room, narrow, windowless, air thick with stale smoke. A single naked bulb hangs overhead, its light carving hard shadows across the metal table. On the table sits a file folder and a dented metal bucket. Polyakov notes the bucket automatically. He has seen too many interrogations. Buckets are for vomit or blood, maybe both. Behind the table sits a man he recognizes from whispered stories. Colonel Vitaly Yurchenko, counterintelligence, the kind of officer who survives purges, leadership changes, and doctrinal shifts because his loyalty is not to ideology, but to the hunt itself. A predator in human form. Yurchenko looks at Polyakov not as a traitor, not as a criminal, but as a problem to be fully solved, cataloged, and then discarded. Yurchenko opens the folder without speaking. Silence stretches. The bulb hums. Somewhere in the building, a heavy door slams like distant thunder. Polyakov feels sweat prickle his back under the wool. He forces his breathing slow, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Old training. Survive the moment in front of you. Everything else is fantasy. Finally, Yurchenko slides the first photograph across the table. Black and white. Grainy. Central Park, New York, 1973. The angle is poor, but the image is unmistakable. 2 men passing each other on a path. 1 Soviet officer, 1 American. For anyone else, it is meaningless. For Polyakov, it is the memory of a heartbeat, of a package slipping from his hand to another, of treason committed in broad daylight under the eyes of families feeding ducks. His throat goes dry. The room tilts slightly. He grabs the edge of the chair with both hands to keep from sliding to the floor. Another photo, a restaurant in New York, a blurred reflection in a window, his own profile caught mid-sentence. A third, the trunk of a diplomatic car open under a street lamp, his hand resting on a suitcase. Each image is a knife sliding slowly between his ribs. None of these angles come from Soviet surveillance alone. Someone else took them. Someone on the other side. Someone who then handed them to Moscow. For a moment, he cannot breathe. Not because they caught him. He always knew the day would come. What steals his breath is the realization that it did not come from a slip in tradecraft or a random stroke of bad luck. It came from betrayal, not his, theirs, the Americans. When he finally speaks, his voice sounds thin and unfamiliar in his own ears. He admits the year it started, 1962. The first approach in New York. The polite conversation at a diplomatic reception that led to a walk on a quiet street, then to an offer. Money, he refused. Ideology, he argued. Responsibility, they framed it. They told him his own generals would sleepwalk the world into nuclear war unless somebody inside the Soviet system whispered truth into foreign ears. He told himself he was that whisper, that he was saving Russia from its leaders. It felt like patriotism wearing the mask of treason. As he talks, his body begins to rebel. His hands twitch. His vision pulses at the edges. At one point, when Yurchenko calmly reads back a detail from a report Polyakov gave the Americans in 1971, right down to the phrasing he used about a new missile system, something inside him finally breaks. He leans sideways and vomits violently into the bucket. Acid burns his throat. His eyes water. Yurchenko does not move, does not flinch, just waits, pen ready, like a man pausing while his fountain pen refills. The interrogation grinds on for hours. Time dissolves. Day or night cease to matter in the artificial light. They bring no food. A guard occasionally holds a tin cup to Polyakov's lips. Water hits his empty stomach like stone. Questions shift from broad to precise. Code names, meeting points, how capsules were concealed, how signals were sent. He answers because there is no strategy left except completeness. Maybe they will be quicker with the bullet if he does not force them to dig. But underneath every factual answer, a single question chews at him like a rat in the dark. Who told them? Which man in Langley, Virginia, sat at a desk, opened a file with his name on it, and decided that this Russian general was worth more dead than alive? 6,000 miles away, that man sits in a fluorescent-lit conference room. Langley, same day, 9:23 ante Meridium Eastern Time. The Soviet Eastern European Division gathers around a long table littered with coffee cups and stapled briefing packets. On the wall, a map of the Soviet Union bristles with colored pins. Each pin once represented a living, breathing human being, risking everything for the promise of a different future. Today, several pins might as well mark graves. The atmosphere is wrong, too quiet. When the division chief asks for updates, the list of no contacts reads like a slow execution. Top Hat missed his last channel. Another source failed a dead drop. A third did not turn up at a brush pass. Communications nets that had hummed for years fall silent in the space of weeks. The analysts talk about technical failures, comms breakdowns, increased Soviet surveillance. They offer any explanation that does not involve the word everyone tastes at the back of their throat and refuses to say, mole. One senior officer, Burton Gerber, finally gives that word shape without speaking it. He talks about statistical impossibility, independent systems failing simultaneously, multiple agents disappearing at once. He looks around the table and lets the sentence hang. These patterns make sense only if someone handed Moscow a list. He does not need to add the rest. Someone with access here, someone with clearance here, someone breathing the same air. In the back of the room, Aldrich Hazen Ames writes a few notes on his legal pad, as if the conversation is just another operational review. His face shows the exact level of concern everyone expects from a man in his position. Jaw tight, brows slightly drawn. A small shake of the head when yet another lost agent's code name is mentioned. Inside, there is no panic. Only a cold, technical satisfaction. Moscow moved fast, faster than he projected. Efficient, disciplined, thorough. The reaction proves his value more effectively than any envelope of cash. That evening, while Polyakov lies on his cot staring at the stains on the ceiling of his cell and replaying every decision of the last 2 decades, Ames stands in the fluorescent glare of a supermarket in Arlington, Virginia. He lingers in front of a refrigerator full of meat, one hand on the glass door, feeling the cold bleed into his skin. Beside the checkout stands a wire rack of newspapers. A small Soviet wire story buried near the bottom of an international column mentions internal investigations and treacherous elements uncovered in the armed forces. No names, no details. Just enough for anyone who understands the language of regimes to know that somewhere far away, people are being erased. He pretends not to see it, picks up a steak, moves on. In his cart sits a bottle of whiskey more expensive than anything his official salary can reasonably support. A dry run, a test, a first small taste of the new life he is buying with other men's blood. At home, his girlfriend Rosario will ask about the sudden luxury. He will tell her some story about back pay, about overtime, about family help. She will believe him because it is easier than imagining that the man she loves walked voluntarily into an enemy embassy and sold souls by the sheetful. Back in Moscow, days bleed into each other. March becomes April. The trial takes 90 minutes. The verdict takes 6. Death by firing squad. No appeal. No last speech to the court. In the cell, when they inform him, Polyakov does not collapse. Instead, something inside him goes still. Not acceptance. Not peace. Just the final snapping of a wire that has been under tension for too many years. When the guards leave, he moves to the wall and begins scratching letters into the crumbling plaster with a broken fingernail. 2 names. His sons. The skin on his fingertip tears. Blood mixes with dust. He keeps scratching until the names are barely legible red smears. One night, the steps stop outside his door. More than one pair. Boots. Keys. The bolt slides back with a sound he has heard 1,000 times, but tonight the air in the cell feels different. Thinner. Colder. He stands before they tell him to. His legs tremble so violently that one guard has to grab his elbow to keep him from falling. The corridor seems longer now. Each fluorescent light buzzes overhead like an angry insect. As they guide him toward the end of the hall, toward the staircase that angles down into deeper darkness, he realizes with terrible clarity that he will never see the sky again, never feel wind, never hear his grandchildren's voices, because there will be no grandchildren of a traitor. He reaches the top of the stairs. There is a smell below that the disinfectant cannot fully mask. Old gunpowder, damp concrete, something metallic and sweet that his brain refuses to name. The guard on his left tightens his grip. The one on his right opens the door to the stairwell. "Time, Comrade General," the guard says softly. Polyakov closes his eyes. For a heartbeat, he sees not Moscow, not Lefortovo, but a park bench in New York, a thermos of coffee, an American handler sliding a newspaper across to him with a microfilm capsule hidden in the spine. He had told himself then that he was saving his country. Now, walking down into the dark, he understands that the country does not care why he did it. It only cares that he did. And somewhere in Virginia, the man who sold him for money will sleep in a warm bed after a good meal. He takes the first step down. April 24th, 1985, late afternoon, over Washington, D.C. The sky hangs low and gray, the kind of color that makes the Potomac look like spilled lead. In a quiet residential street in northwest Washington, a man in an expensive overcoat walks toward a nondescript bank with a briefcase that is much heavier than it looks. The briefcase weighs exactly 8 kilograms. Almost all of that weight is cash. 3 blocks away, Aldrich Hazen Ames sits behind the wheel of his brown Jaguar, engine idling, fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel. His pulse is calm, 68 beats per minute. The same pathological calm that carried him through the embassy gate in February. Sweat gathers between his shoulder blades anyway, not from fear of getting caught, from something else. Anticipation. He checks the rearview mirror for the 5th time. Same cars, same traffic. No vehicle has followed him through more than 2 turns. No obvious tail. A lifetime in counterintelligence taught him what surveillance looks like. He sees none of it now. At 4:12 post-meridium, the man with the briefcase exits the bank. He does not look around, does not hesitate. He walks to the corner, turns right, and disappears. He has done his part. Inside the bank, in a rented safe deposit box under a false name, sits Ames's first major payment, $50,000 in neat stacks, used bills, mixed denominations, nothing traceable. Ames waits exactly 7 minutes. Then he kills the engine, steps out of the car, and walks into the bank as if he has an appointment to discuss a mortgage. He gives a false name, shows a false passport, carefully prepared by his Soviet handlers to withstand casual scrutiny, and signs a card with a practiced hand. The clerk smiles mechanically and leads him to the vault. The safe deposit room is small and quiet. Thick walls swallow the sounds of the world. The clerk opens the box for him and steps away, politely turning her back. Professional distance, professional courtesy. Ames slides the metal drawer out, heart still infuriatingly steady. Inside, wrapped in plain brown paper, sits the bundle. He peels it open. It is one thing to imagine $50,000, another to see it. Bills stack up like bricks. He touches the edges with his fingertips. The paper feels dry and rough. He presses his thumb down on the top of the pile and feels the weight of what it represents. Not just money, corpses, names crossed out in a Moscow office, files stamped in red, bullets ordered, cigarettes lit in dim basements, while men are marched to walls and told to face forward. For one brief, flickering second, the room seems to tilt. His brain supplies images it has never actually seen. Polyakov in front of a firing squad, Motorin and Martinov in a prison yard, Tolkachev in a concrete cell, hearing the bolt of a rifle. He does not know exactly how they died, but his imagination fills in the blanks with surgical precision. His fingers tighten on the money. The moment passes. He closes the box, nods to the clerk, and walks out of the bank carrying nothing but a thin folder of papers. The cash stays where it is for now, untouched, existing as a proof of concept, Moscow's way of saying this is real, this is the beginning, there will be more if you keep going. That night, he sits at his small kitchen table in Arlington with a legal pad and a calculator. An empty plate with steak crumbs still on it rests nearby, next to an almost empty glass of whiskey that costs more than his entire weekly grocery budget used to. The good bottle. He bought it after visiting the bank. A reward. A private celebration. On the pad, he writes numbers in careful columns. Salary, taxes, alimony, debts, the cost of the Jaguar, the cost of a better apartment, the cost of the life he thinks he deserves but was never going to reach inside the rigid pay scales of the agency. Then, in a separate column, he writes larger numbers, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 per year if the Soviets keep paying at the rate they hinted. At the bottom of the page, he writes a phrase and underlines it twice, financial independence. He stares at the words. They look clean on the page, clinical, devoid of detail. The pad does not show the other column, the one in Moscow, filled with different numbers, years of sentences, counts of espionage, number of shots fired. In Moscow, families receive visits from stone-faced officers who speak in monotone voices about state crimes and necessary measures. Wives sign papers they can barely read. Children ask where their fathers are. No one gives them real answers. In Virginia, Ames flips the page and starts a new set of calculations. How much he can safely spend without raising questions. He cannot suddenly transform into a millionaire. That would attract the wrong eyes. The art lies in the gradual upgrade. A slightly better suit, a slightly better car, a move from a cramped apartment to a nicer townhouse, gifts for Rosario, trips, all of it explained away by stories about inheritances, side consulting, family loans, lies layered carefully over the truth like wallpaper over cracked plaster. The next morning, he walks into CIA headquarters wearing a new tie, subtle pattern, higher quality fabric than his usual cheap ones. A small test. In the break room, a colleague notices and comments that it looks good. Ames shrugs and says it was on sale. The colleague accepts this without thinking. Nobody imagines that a tie can be bought with blood. The workday moves forward in its usual rhythm. Memos, briefings, secure phone calls. In a secure room, a task force has begun quietly reviewing the collapse of operations in Moscow. Files pile up, charts are drawn, timelines built. The pattern is unmistakable now. Multiple high-value sources rolled up in an impossibly tight window. There is no more talk of coincidence, No more comforting theories about random bad luck. The word mole is spoken aloud. They draw up lists of people who had access to the compromised files. Names go on whiteboards. Some have question marks beside them. Some have dates. All of them belong to living, breathing men and women who walk the same hallways, drink the same burnt coffee, share the same parking garage. Ames's name appears on one of those boards, middle of the list, not circled, not highlighted, just present. A data point among many. His job gives him access to almost everything in the Soviet division. That makes him suspicious on paper, but so are others, bright, rising officers with spotless records and good reputations. He attends a meeting about the investigation, sits through discussions of security procedures and file access audits, nods at the right moments, offers a few cautious professional comments about tightening controls and improving compartmentation. Nothing radical, nothing that could be read later as overcompensation. When the meeting ends, an FBI liaison pulls him aside briefly in the hallway. Polite questions. How long have you been in this position? Which cases did you handle directly? Any unusual requests you remember from colleagues? Ames answers easily, voice level, eyes steady. He has rehearsed these conversations in his head for weeks. Truth mixed with omission. Never outright lies where simple deflection will do. That night, alone again at his kitchen table, he pours another glass of whiskey and opens a fresh pad. This time, he does not write numbers. He writes names, not Soviet names, those he already sold. American names, the names of colleagues who share his access, men and women who are more talented, more respected, more liked than he is, possible scapegoats. He does not think of them that way consciously, but the list exists anyway. If the investigation ever gets too close, if he needs to steer suspicion, the names on this page could become tools. He studies the list for a long time. Then slowly, he tears the page into small pieces and drops them into the kitchen trash. Even in his arrogance, he understands that writing certain things down is a line he cannot cross. Some betrayals must stay in his head. Far away, under a different sky, another man is making his last walk. Dmitry Polyakov descends the final stairs beneath Lefortovo, the smell of damp concrete and old gunpowder closing around him like a physical thing. Guards position him in front of a wall pocked with marks that could be old bullet scars or just the imagination filling in what the regime refuses to record. A doctor stands nearby with a clipboard, the same way a doctor might stand beside a patient going into routine surgery. The procedure is always the same. Confirm identity, confirm sentence, confirm death. The rifle squad steps into place, boots scuff against concrete. Someone coughs. In Arlington, at that same moment by the clock, Ames lifts his glass. The whiskey burns a warm line down his throat. He closes his eyes briefly and feels a strange, hollow mix of triumph and emptiness. He has done what no one in his world dares to do. He has turned the entire machinery of Soviet counterintelligence into his personal bank. Across the ocean, a single sharp sound cracks the silence of a basement. The next morning, Ames wakes with a mild headache and the vague memory of half-formed dreams in which faceless men fall backward in slow motion, their uniforms darkening at the chest. He showers, dresses, knots his new tie, and drives back to Langley through early morning traffic. As he shows his badge at the gate, the guard waves him through without really looking. Inside the building, a printout waits on a desk in a secure office. Intelligence chatter indicates that several Soviet traitors have been sentenced and dealt with. No details, no names, just confirmation that somewhere in Moscow, cases have been closed. The officer who reads it feels a cold anger tightening in his chest. Whoever the mole is, wherever he sits, he just killed some of the bravest people the agency has ever run. The officer signs the routing slip and sends the paper onward. Aldrich Ames hangs his jacket on the back of his chair, sits down at his desk, and turns on his agency terminal. On the surface, nothing in his life has changed. His office is the same. His title is the same. His badge still opens the same doors. The only difference now is invisible. Somewhere, 2 million rubles worth of American blood sits stacked in a metal box in a Washington bank vault, waiting patiently for him to decide how many lives he wants to spend. Summer 1988, Langley, Virginia. The heat hangs over the Central Intelligence Agency parking lot like a sheet of glass. Government sedans sit in neat, colorless rows. In the middle of this gray ocean, the brown Jaguar looks obscene, too sleek, too polished, too confident, a luxury shark among tired bureaucratic fish. Its leather seats and shining chrome are upholstered in something no one here can see yet, but every stitch has been paid for in secrets, interrogations, and bullets. Inside the building, under humming fluorescent lights, Aldrich Hazen Ames moves down a corridor with his usual slow, slightly heavy gait. He looks like a man who lost an argument with gravity years ago and has been politely losing every day since. The red veins in his eyes, the soft stomach under his shirt, the faint, sour smell of old alcohol that clings to his breath in the mornings. None of this is a mystery to his colleagues. Everyone knows he drinks. Everyone knows his marriage is a wreck, now replaced by another complicated relationship. Everyone has seen him stumble slightly on the stairs once or twice after lunch. They shake their heads and file him in the same mental drawer. Good enough officer, bad life choices, not going anywhere important. A sad story, not a dangerous one. 2 floors above him, in a secure conference room with no windows and too much air conditioning, a group of counterintelligence officers sits around a table buried in folders, printouts, and hand-drawn timelines. On the wall, taped pages form a crude mosaic of dates and names. Colored markers trace the last known movements of Soviet agents who once worked for the United States, then suddenly stopped sending messages and started disappearing into prisons and graveyards. The pattern is not subtle anymore. It looks like a series of detonations along a single fault line. Agents arrested in Moscow within weeks of each other. Others rolled up abroad. Operations that had survived for years collapsing almost in unison. No one in this room uses the word coincidence anymore. That word died 2 years ago, right around the time the 5th high-value source vanished. They give the unknown traitor a placeholder name, the penetration, the mole. When the room is empty and the hallway is clear, one of the older officers mutters another name under his breath, almost like a curse. Our Philby, the British defector who gutted his own service from the inside. The comparison flatters Kim Philby. Philby believed he was serving an idea. Whoever is doing this serves only himself. On paper, Ames should feel the walls closing. The investigation has grown teeth and patience. Financial audits, background reinvestigations, quiet interviews that begin with easy questions and slowly turn harder. And then there is the machine, a windowless room, a narrow chair, sensors taped to fingers and chest, a polygraph examiner with the bored eyes of a man who has listened to every possible lie. The examiner asks whether Ames has ever passed classified information to a foreign intelligence service. The needles scratch black lines across white paper, waiting for his pulse to give him away. Ames listens to the question and feels nothing unusual. His heart rate bumps, then steadies. His breathing remains slow. Years of rehearsed deceit and the heavy, numbing blanket of his own cynicism have shaved the edges off his conscience. "No," he says. Voice flat, almost tired. The pens twitch, dip, rise. Later, another analyst will stare at those lines and see small anomalies, tiny spikes that could mean stress, or could mean that the subject just really hates polygraphs. Nothing leaps off the page screaming traitor. The machine hears the lie but does not comprehend it. The financial review should be easier. Money leaves footprints. But Ames has spent years learning to walk on the edges of those tracks. The Jaguar raises questions. So do the upgraded suits, the better restaurants, the occasional whisper of an expensive trip. When auditors quietly flag these, explanations appear like pre-printed excuses. His wife has family money. There was some inheritance. They sold something. He gestures loosely toward a vague help from her people and shrugs in that embarrassed, masculine way that says, "Can we please stop talking about my finances now?" People see what they want to see. A mid-grade officer drowning in midlife crisis, trying to impress his younger wife with a car he cannot really afford. Pitiful, not lethal. Nobody wants to imagine the man from the cubicle next door as the reason their sources were dragged into basements halfway around the world. At home, the story looks different. The cramped, depressing Arlington apartment is gone. First came a nicer rental, then a townhouse with decent furniture, then a house that finally looks like it matches the car. The cheap glasses in the cupboard have been replaced by heavier crystal. The couch costs more than his entire annual rent once did. Rosario flips through glossy catalogs and points at things she likes. Somehow, most of them arrive within weeks. "Are you sure we can afford this?" she asks one evening, fingers brushing fabric on a new sofa that feels far too luxurious to touch with bare hands. He lets out a small, irritated breath, repeats the story about delayed payments, back pay, consulting work, help from family. He puts just enough annoyance in his tone to make her feel that asking again would mean accusing him of lying. She is not ready to live with that possibility. So, like the auditors, like his coworkers, she accepts the explanation because the alternative is too ugly to contemplate. In Moscow, the alternative is not theoretical. It lives in concrete and metal and paper. In a small Soviet apartment, a woman in her 50s stands at a sink scrubbing plates in lukewarm water because the hot tap has died again. Above the sink, a faint line on the wall marks where a framed photograph used to hang. Her husband in uniform, medals catching the light. That frame came down the day the men in gray suits visited. The cardboard box in her cupboard holds that photograph now, face down, along with a medal wrapped in cloth and a letter full of heavy words. Treason, betrayal, state security. Her husband's name has been scratched out of some records, pinned to others. Officially, he died a traitor. Unofficially, nobody talks about him at all. Her son knows more than she says. Children in such countries always know more. He has heard the rumors. KGB officer, contact with Americans, spies. He also knows that if he wants to keep his job, his freedom, and what is left of their life, he must never phrase any of this as sympathy. So he sits at the kitchen table with a chipped mug of tea and quietly watches his mother look at the closed cupboard, eyes shining in the weak light, and carry a shame that belongs to a man she will never be allowed to mourn honestly. She will never know the name Aldrich Hazen Ames. She will never know that her husband's last words were probably spoken to a firing squad wall. She will never know that the man who sold her family for cash now sits in a Virginia suburb, swirling whiskey in a glass and debating whether to move his next payment from one safe deposit box to another for slightly better interest. Back in Langley, the hunt evolves. Enough time has passed. Enough cases have been dissected that the people in the secure rooms begin to change the way they think. They stop waiting for the cartoon version of a traitor, the man who suddenly rolls up in a red sports car, buys a mansion, and wears gold watches to staff meetings. Instead, they start asking sharper questions. Who paid off a mortgage too fast? Who erased credit card debt in a single year? Who always seems to have just enough money without any visible explanation? Old spreadsheets are dusted off. Bank statements are revisited. Patterns emerge where before there was only white noise. Numbers that once looked like personal luck now start to smell like something else. On one of those spreadsheets, a particular name shows unusual behavior. Debts that should have lingered disappear. A loan balance shrinks ahead of schedule. Travel and lifestyle do not quite match salary, even with a generous interpretation. The name gets underlined, then circled, then transferred to a shorter list on a separate sheet that nobody jokes about. In the Soviet division, younger officers arrive, fresh from training, faces still too smooth for the kind of work they have chosen. They hear about the bad years in vague terms. Senior officers mention significant asset losses and penetration concerns in briefings. The stories are cut short just before they become personal. No one wants to stand up in front of a room and confess that they shook hands with men who trusted them, and then later watched those men vanish one by one. Ames watches the newcomers with a lazy hooded gaze that hides something sharper behind it. He sees the way they lean in during briefings, the way their pens move quickly, the way some of them still talk about defending the country without irony. Once, long ago, he might have sounded like that. He cannot remember exactly when that version of himself died. Maybe at his first humiliation in a performance review. Maybe sometime during his drinking. Maybe the exact moment he put 7 names on a piece of paper and folded it into his pocket. Now he sees something else in them, potential shields. The more talented they are, the more natural it feels to everyone that they, not he, will handle the big cases, the sensitive sources, the real decisions. He cultivates his image as the slightly worn veteran, useful but not essential. A dull knife in the drawer beside the shiny ones. Moscow's questions change as well. Early on, they wanted names, lists. direct access to the backbone of American operations against the Soviet Union. Now, with that spine largely shattered, they hunger for something more subtle and, in some ways, more dangerous. They want insight. A cable framed in diplomatic phrases but heavy underneath arrives through a channel that has nothing to do with CIA communications. It asks, in essence, how does the American mind work? When the Politburo shifts, when troops move, when a factory goes dark for a week, how do your analysts read it? Which interpretations they fight over? Which fears keep them awake? Ames becomes more than a thief of documents. He becomes an interpreter of his own side's thinking. In closed meetings at Langley, he listens quietly while analysts argue over whether some Soviet economic stumble signals weakness or strategy. He notes who believes the Soviet system is crumbling and who believes it is adapting, who sees threat everywhere and who sees opportunity. Later, in private reports to his handlers, he strips away names and gives the KGB something more valuable: fault lines inside American perception. For this, the payments grow heavier, more zeros, more careful wraps of cash in more boxes behind more anonymous keys. The freedom he once sketched on legal pads late at night as financial independence now has real shape. A retirement not in poverty, not in some small town forgotten by everyone who matters, but in comfort, maybe abroad, maybe in a house where nobody ever again tells him he is merely average. The irony is that his carefully built mediocrity has begun to turn on him. In a career field where hungry people either rise or leave, his sideways life, no promotions, no notable transfers, no big visible wins, now draws quiet interest. Why has this man stayed exactly where he is for so long? Why does he move just enough to avoid being pushed out, but never enough to attract attention? One Saturday evening, at a small dinner party, a fellow officer watches Ames open an expensive bottle of wine. The label is not the sort of thing their pay grades normally see outside of someone else's house. Ames jokes lightly about needing a little treat after another long week of bureaucracy. People laugh. Glasses are raised. The conversation rolls on to easier topics. But later, as the colleague rides home through the dark Virginia streets, a thought will not leave. Jaguar, better suits, travel, that bottle. The way Ames always has just enough. Never obviously too much, but always more than a man in their line of work should comfortably afford. The thought does not harden into an accusation yet. It hardens into a question. Questions like that are what eventually build cases. In another secure room at Langley, a whiteboard gets updated. The list of possible suspects grows shorter, not longer. Some names are crossed out with hard, satisfying slashes after deep checks clear them. Others remain, black letters on a slowly emptying field. On that board, the letters AMES no longer blend into the alphabet soup. They sit there, middle of the list, surrounded by fewer and fewer neighbors. Nobody has drawn a circle around them yet. Nobody has taken a marker and written the word mole beside them in block capitals. The investigation is not there, not yet. But the distance between that line of dry erase ink and the man strolling down the corridor with a coffee cup in one hand and a folder of classified documents in the other is shrinking. That same week, Monday morning, the parking lot shimmers again. Ames steps out of his brown Jaguar, locks it with a casual twist, and walks toward the entrance. His badge pings the reader. The guard glances up, recognizes the face, and hits the button to open the turnstile without thinking. To everyone watching, Aldrich Ames looks exactly as he has for years. A tired, slightly disheveled middle-aged man in a government building full of tired, slightly disheveled middle-aged men. He has no idea that somewhere, behind a closed door on another floor, his name is now being spoken a little more often, a little more carefully, a little more quietly. For the first time since he walked through the gate of the Soviet embassy with 7 names in his pocket, the hunter and the hunted are finally walking toward each other. February 21st, 1994, early morning, Langley, Virginia. The winter sky hangs low and colorless over the Central Intelligence Agency compound. The air tastes like cold metal. In the parking lot, the brown Jaguar that once looked obscene among government sedans now just looks old. The shine is duller. The line's a little out of fashion. The man who owns it has aged the same way. Inside a secure office not far from where Ames works, a very small group of people sits around a table. No whiteboards this time, no sprawling webs of names, just a thin stack of printouts, a few photographs, and one name that is no longer just ink on a list. Ames. The numbers killed him in the end, not the bodies. Those stayed hidden in Moscow basements and unmarked graves, but the dollars, quiet deposits, fast shrinking debts, a mortgage that should have taken decades cleared in years, trips paid in cash, patterns that, once seen, could not be unseen. The investigators went back over everything, following money trails like veins through stone. Again and again, the path curved toward the same ordinary, unimpressive man in the Soviet division. They checked again and again. They fought the instinct that had protected him for nearly a decade. The reflex that said, "Not him, he is too sloppy, too drunk, too mediocre to be the architect of so much damage." Eventually, the evidence crushed that reflex into dust. The ghost finally had a clear, undeniable face. The decision to arrest him is almost anticlimactic. There is no cinematic debate, no one pounding the table shouting that this cannot be true. By the time they are ready to move, the facts have settled like lead in everyone's stomach. The warrant is signed, the plan is sketched. Nobody in the room feels satisfaction, only a kind of exhausted fury. That afternoon, Ames leaves headquarters early. He thinks he is going to a routine meeting in Washington. He walks out through the lobby, badge clipped to his belt, coat folded over one arm. The guards nod as he passes. He has walked this path thousands of times. The rhythm of the exit is so familiar that his body could probably do it without his mind. He does not know that other men are already in place, waiting. He gets into the Jaguar. The engine coughs, then catches. He pulls out of his space, turns toward the exit, stops at the security gate. The guard checks the mirror under his car, as always, then waves him through. Once he is on the public road, he settles into traffic, merges onto the highway, and points the nose of the car toward the city. A few miles down, a sedan slides in behind him. Another moves up 2 lanes over. He glances in the rearview mirror and sees nothing that alarms him. Just Washington traffic. Just another day. Near a quiet stretch of road, the trap snaps shut with the efficiency he never expected from the people he has been fooling for years. A car in front of him brakes. The one behind closes the gap too quickly. Another angles across his flank. Lights flash. Siren wails once sharp and decisive. His hands tighten on the steering wheel. For a heartbeat, he instinctively starts to form a story. A wrong turn. A misunderstanding. Something. Anything. The men who step out of the surrounding cars wear the kind of clothes that say law enforcement even before the badges appear. Their movements are clipped, professional, no wasted motion. One of them approaches the driver's side window with a face that has forgotten what it is like to smile at work. Aldrich Hazen Ames, he says, voice flat, carrying more weight than any shouted accusation. Something in Ames's chest goes very quiet. He is told to turn off the engine and step out of the car. There is a moment, brief as a blink, when he considers running, slamming the Jaguar into gear, and trying to punch a hole through the blockade. The thought dies as quickly as it came. He is not a young man anymore. He is not a field officer. His war, such as it was, lived in files and meetings and quiet walks into embassies. There is nowhere to run now, physically or otherwise. He kills the engine, opens the door, steps out into the cold. Hands take his wrists, firm, impersonal. Metal closes around them. The click of handcuffs is louder in his ears than the single gunshot that ended Dmitry Polyakov's life years earlier. That was .45 caliber steel against bone in a Moscow basement. This is steel against aging American flesh on the side of a highway. Cause and effect finally touching. They read him his rights. The words wash over him in a blur of legal phrases he has heard 100 times in training scenarios, never meant for him. He catches fragments. Anything you say. Used against you. Attorney. The vocabulary of a system he betrayed being applied to him at last. His eyes flick down the road once, as if expecting to see someone watching from a distance. There is no one. The Soviet Union he served for money and spite has already begun to crack and crumble. Its flag is coming down over buildings where his reports once landed on desks stamped with red stars. The empire he sold secrets to is dying. The country he betrayed remains standing. The irony is bitter enough to taste. They put him in the back of a car. No one speaks on the ride. The world outside the window passes in muted colors: gray road, brown trees, concrete overpasses. He watches the familiar landscape of his double life slide by and knows with a deep, sinking certainty that he is seeing it like this for the last time. Interrogation looks different when you are on the wrong side of the table. The rooms are cleaner here than in Le Fortovo. The fluorescent lights are the same harsh white. The faces across from him are neither cruel nor kind. They are focused. For years, he told himself that if this day came, he would be able to outsmart them one more time. Slip through on some technicality, deny, bluff, twist. The piles of evidence on the table make that fantasy look pathetic. They lay out photographs, account records, safe deposit box logs, surveillance shots from years he thought he moved invisibly, pages from his own reports matched with Soviet actions that could not have happened without his betrayal. Every piece of paper is another nail. At some point, something gives way. The words start coming. Maybe it is vanity, an urge to show them how clever he really was, how much he did under their noses. Maybe it is exhaustion. Maybe it is the simple animal understanding that cooperation might buy a less brutal sentence. He begins to talk about meetings, about dead drops, about names. When he says Polyakov's name aloud in that American room, it sounds different. He had always thought of it as a code, part of the game. Now it lands in the air like a weight. The interrogators know some of these details already. Others make them shift in their seats. Lives they tried and failed to understand now come into clearer, uglier focus. In Moscow, those lives ended years ago. In that sense, there is no justice available here. No sentence on an American traitor will bring a single man back up from a prison cellar or pull a single bullet out of a skull. The scale is broken. All anyone can do now is stack weight on the other side and call it balance. The trial, when it comes, is not a spectacle. There are headlines, of course, words like worst and devastating and catastrophic breach. Prosecutors describe how he compromised every major human source the United States had inside the Soviet Union, how he handed over operations that took years to build for envelopes of cash, and the satisfaction of spiting an employer he felt had undervalued him. Former colleagues testify about the shock of learning that the man they drank bad coffee with was quietly feeding their work into an enemy furnace. He sits at the defense table in a suit that suddenly looks cheap under the courtroom lights. The man who once fascinated the KGB as the most valuable mole in American intelligence now looks small, soft, ordinary. The press sketches him like that too. Heavy glasses, tired face, nothing remarkable in his posture or his hands. The monster that haunted Langley for nearly a decade turns out to look like a man you would not remember after standing behind him in a grocery line. When the sentence comes, life imprisonment with no possibility of parole, it does not shock him. The words feel almost theoretical compared to the narrower, sharper reality he has already understood. His world has shrunk to concrete, metal, and routines measured in counts and lockdowns. He will wake, walk, eat, and sleep according to schedules he does not control until his body fails in some anonymous cell. Somewhere in Russia, a woman in her 60s still keeps a cardboard box in a cupboard. The state no longer watches her as closely as it once did. Regimes change, priorities shift, new scandals and new traitors fill new headlines. She occasionally sees Western faces on television talking about espionage and betrayal. The names mean nothing to her. The pain is too old, the scar tissue too thick. She opens the box less often now. When she does, she touches the metal and the photograph and feels a dull ache instead of the sharp, tearing grief that once threatened to drown her. She will never hear the name of the man who sold her husband. If she did, it would not give her back a single day of the life that was taken from them. In a federal prison in the United States, Aldrich Hazen Ames learns the small geography of his new existence, the exact distance from his bunk to the cell door, the pattern of cracks in the paint on the ceiling, the sound of the guard's keys at specific times of day, the institutional smell that seeps into everything, disinfectant sweat, overcooked food, recycled air. At night, he sometimes lies awake and stares at the faint reflection of the corridor light on the metal edge of his bunk. The Jaguar is gone. The house is gone. The safe deposit boxes are empty memories. The money he traded for lives buys him nothing here. There are no ties to impress anyone, no dinners, no bottles with labels worth noticing. He tells himself, as he once told himself sitting alone at his kitchen table with a calculator and a glass of whiskey, that he made rational choices, that he was underpaid, that the agency deserved what it got, that history is made by men who refuse to accept the limits imposed on them. He builds these arguments in his head like legal briefs for an audience that does not exist. But in the moments when the prison is quietest, when even the usual noises of shouting and metal in television sets fade, other images slip through. A paper folded in his pocket with 7 names on it. A dim corridor under Moscow. A man in a Soviet uniform walking down a flight of stairs, one hand brushing a wall that smells like old gunpowder and damp concrete. The faces in those images are not clear. He never met most of the men he killed. He only read them, code names, file numbers, assessments of reliability and access. But his imagination, which once served him so well in building rationalizations, now serves him scenes that have no bureaucratic filter, a blindfold slipping, a last breath, a wall. In Langley, the maps changed after his arrest. New pins appeared as the United States slowly, cautiously rebuilt a network inside a country that itself was changing shape. The officers who lost friends and sources to his betrayal did not get closure from the sight of his name on an indictment or from the knowledge that he sat in a cell. There is no closure in this line of work. There is only the next case, the next risk, the next quiet handshake in a different city's shadows. The ghost that once haunted the corridors is gone now, replaced by something paradoxically less frightening and more disturbing. The memory that the most destructive traitor in the agency's history did not look like a monster. He looked like a man with a hangover, a bad marriage, and a taste for slightly better cars than his salary allowed. That is the part that lingers for the people who knew him. Not the headlines, not even the legal language in the case files, but the mundane details. The sound of his laugh in the break room, the way he complained about the coffee, the sight of him shuffling papers in a meeting while everyone assumed his mind was as dull as his expression. In the end, Aldrich Ames did not just sell secrets. He sold the illusion that betrayal always comes with clear warning signs. He proved that sometimes it comes wearing a fraying tie, carrying a stack of folders, and asking if anyone wants another cup because the pot is still half full. The Cold War moved on without him. The world changed. New enemies rose. New moles were hunted. His name faded from front pages into footnotes. But in 2 countries, on opposite sides of the old divide, the invisible damage remained. In Russia, in small apartments and faded memories, there are families whose fathers and husbands never came home. In America, behind one set of bars in one anonymous prison, sits the man who turned their lives into numbers on a secret ledger and discovered too late that the price he charged the world could never buy him the one thing he thought he was purchasing all along: freedom.